Over the years, more and more artists and just people who love Meher Baba have become attracted to depicting him in various mediums and moods. This has evolved only over the past few decades. When Baba was alive, very few were painting him. We didn't guess the possibilities. I think we paint him because we want to be able to see him better, to reflect that fraction of his look that's in our heart back to the world so everyone else can share it too. Anyone, I feel, who is trying to find Meher Baba by making a picture of him, or poem, or song, or something to eat, must have some of his magic running through what they do. And that magic is for anyone who sees, hears, or enjoys it too. That's how it seems to me. When I started to paint Baba, I had to overcome some things in myself. This was before artists like Lynn Ott had emerged. I was in my early 20s, taking myself deadly seriously as a contemporary artist. The Baba lovers around me were all very much older, and I thought I could feel them all looking forward to the time when I'd settle down to copy Baba photographs exactly for them. I loathed that idea. I really felt that painting Baba wasn't exactly art, except in the sense of religious calendar art. I felt that kind of art was really tacky. That's hard to understand now when Baba art is in full bloom. But in those days, there was no already shown way to make beautiful new Baba art of the heart. So it was hard to see the possibilities. I had to back into them as a sort of unaware pioneer. As I resisted painting Baba, I tried every contemporary trend in art I could think of. Hard edge, pop, abstract, and so forth. Anything but Baba. This was in spite of having met Baba and loving him. I'd love him, I thought, but I wouldn't paint him. After putting endless time and energy into this sort of painting and having a few shows, I noticed I was beginning to feel a growing sense of confusion and futility. I couldn't spot a sense of direction or growing purpose in all this art I was making. At this time, I often visited a man named Lindbergh, the director of the galleries at the California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland. I hung around and was willing to run errands in hopes that I could snag an art show in one of his galleries. There was a turnover. Lindbergh left his job as director. Perhaps he'd recommended me to his successor. Anyway, this new guy got in touch with me and offered me a show. He was a Baba lover, and his name was Bill Donahue. Because I had come to a point of confusion in my paintings where they all looked like they were riding off in different directions, I told him I didn't feel ready for a show. Just at that point, Bill said, "Well, why not have a drawing show?" I had never taken my drawings seriously, but I had a vast stock of them. They had a much more united look than my paintings, so I amassed about 50 to mount the show. But then Bill began to get pesky. "Where are the Baba drawings? Don't you have any?" I did, but I hadn't intended to use them. I knew of one important art critic in particular who would be hostile to them. Still, my sincerity felt irked. If I really believed in Baba and acknowledged him, I felt I should put my money where my mouth was. I began adding Baba drawings to the show. One was of Baba hugging someone at darshan, I think. One large pastel was of Baba washing a leper. There were about 8 Baba drawings in all, a few good-sized. I felt I had done my bit. I hung the show and went off on vacation. When I came back, the worst had happened. The critic I feared, whose name was actually Frankenstein, had visited my show. He had looked over all my drawings and said to Bill that Baba looked to him like the owner of a delicatessen. I was beside myself, anxiously waiting for the review to come out in the Oakland Tribune. When the review came, it was glowing. It was a large article with a big, juicy photograph of one of my drawings. Frankenstein said many complimentary things, but he didn't mention one word about the drawings of Baba. Oddly, this ticked me off. Here I thought I was really sticking my neck out for Baba, and it wasn't even noticed. I vowed this would not happen again. About this time, Murshida Deuce called me to ask me to give an all-Baba show in the San Francisco Sufi Center. I agreed, but that was actually very hard to do. I had big artistic prejudices, and knocking them down meant months of real struggle to make only a few paintings. 2 days before the show was due to happen, I called Murshida and told her I couldn't do it. She listened in silence. I explained I had hardly anything to show. Her response was, "Well, don't you think you'd better get busy?" Minutes after hanging up, the painting I was working on suddenly came together. Somehow, just a few touches of color completed the picture in a dramatic way, and this was a painting that had given me a lot of trouble. My father, dropping by about then, instantly offered to buy it. Because of that painting, I had a show. It pulled everything together. 3 people wanted to buy that painting. The show was a success, but it was also a revelation. Many new young people had recently joined the Sufis, and I could feel the rush of their feeling for Baba. They weren't looking to criticize, they were looking to love. Suddenly, to paint Baba felt like a joyous thing. I just began painting Baba all the time, and this eventually turned into my profession. Now, I think I'll change the subject and tell you about how I met Baba in the first place and what he can do to your ego. After such a long wait, Baba finally came to California in 1956. Years had gone by looking forward to this moment. I was 12. But one morning, I found myself staring down into a box with a big, beautiful yellow garland in it. We were all at the San Francisco airport waiting for Baba to come in from Myrtle Beach. Murshida was saying that Etta Meady, as the oldest Sufi, was going to be given that garland to put on Baba as soon as she arrived. After some time, we began to get anxious, for Etta had not yet shown up. Then, Murshida said, if Etta didn't come, then I, as the youngest person there, could garland Baba. I began to really hope that Etta wouldn't come. She didn't come, and she didn't come. And finally, I was handed the beautiful yellow garland. I remember holding it as the passengers arrived from Myrtle Beach and came forward like a moving wall. I didn't see Baba anywhere. Then I saw 2 nice-looking Indian men hurrying along. I looked down, and the little guy between them was Baba. He was moving fast, and his glance was flashing around. I ran up to him and garlanded him, and he gave me a big, firm, squeezy hug. Then he quickly moved on. I found myself rushing after him alongside my Aunt Eleanor Smith. That was the very start of a long friendship with Ellie based on trying to get near Baba. This first time I got to be with Baba, he really spoiled me in a way that would be very annoying to really hear about. It is annoying to me, too, when I think of how completely it later went away. Baba took me with him almost everywhere he went. He told me many times how beautiful I was, how lucky and special, and what a great lover of God I was. He set up situations that would make me feel great and really tease others. For example, he would have me sit in a highly visible place on a chair right outside his apartment. The curtains of his large window could be pulled open, and everyone could see me getting to watch Erich brush Baba's hair in the window. Or Baba would invite me to sit on his lap while we watched a show. This didn't last too long, for Edge quietly gave up his seat to me and sat on the floor so Baba would not be squashed. It really didn't occur to me that Baba had come for everyone there in some way equally. It took years to understand that. I guess, like many girls coming out of childhood and approaching adolescence, I was pulling out of being a tomboy and becoming attracted to the idea of looking pretty. My boy-length hair had finally grown out to shoulder length, and I loved it, though I never really brushed it much. My mother really didn't like it and told me she thought for my birthday, which was right around then, she would give me a home permanent. I told her flatly that I would rather not have a present than that one. My mother, exasperated with me and not understanding Baba yet, said, "Well, that's what you're going to have, and don't go running to Baba about it." She told me I had to stay in the apartment. Minutes later, Charmian Deuce and little Tara Frey, can you hear? Stopped by to ask me to go have some fun with them. I gloomily explained why I couldn't. They sympathized and left. It wasn't long before Charmian came running back saying, "Baba wants to see you right away." I rushed off, not worrying too much about how my mother would take this. When I got there, Baba was seated in a chair in the interview room at Holiday Lodge. He said, "Tell your mother she must not cut your hair. I like it long." He had me repeat this 3 times. I danced off to tell my mother the news. Needless to say, my hair was not cut. Sometimes Baba seemed to set up situations that would anger someone who didn't love him yet. Maybe because to be angry at someone is to concentrate on them, and sometimes that concentration can be turned to love, as finally happened in my mother's case. Just before I went to tell my mother about no haircut, Baba looked at me and said, "Always remember me like this." He looked full of effortless kingliness, like a wonderful king who didn't have to work at looking like a king. He also looked like someone who had just saved me. For more than 17 years after that, I kept my hair long until I could sit on it. When I was about 30, I came to see that Baba had defended my long hair not because he wanted me to make a fetish of it for the rest of my life, but to help a child who had no way of speaking up for herself. When I finally cut it off, it felt right. Once, when I was walking by Baba, little Tara Frey joined us and began saying, but not very seriously, as a little girl will, "I hate myself. I just hate myself." Baba turned on her and sternly said, "You must never say that, or even think it." He said to more than one person, "I am never displeased with you." Baba loved to move fast and was always urging my father, who at that time often got to be a chauffeur, to drive faster. Ordinarily, my dad loved to drive fast, but not that fast. Baba had him race down Lombard Street in San Francisco, a street, you know it, a street called the world's steepest street, and also probably the world's twistiest. Baba seemed delighted, but the Mondley with Baba did not. It was on this ride that I asked Baba for a nickname, and he named me BBB, Baba's beloved baby. I wasn't sure I liked the baby part, but I really liked the rest of it. My memory of Baba at this time was that he was very beautiful. Seeing him, you felt you'd seen him every day of your life. It felt so natural to be with him. The photos often show him smiling. Actually, he looked 1,000 different ways. I remember him vivacious and funny, then full of majesty. One look he seemed to have a lot of as he looked at people was a deeply kind look, as though he were saying, "Where does it hurt?" Through all his looks, there seemed to run one look, a somewhat wistful look. It was as if his eyes were saying, "Do you think you could possibly love me?" That first time of meeting Baba, it felt like there was nothing you could keep from him, but he loved you just the way you really were and insisted on no improvements. That was the first time. Baba took me along to different homes, Joseph Harb's, Mercer Deuce's, and Fred Frey's. Wherever he went, after that, life seemed to speed up for these people, and often they had to sell their houses or leave them not too long after. Before Baba left to go back to India, he had me made a Sufi. I had been dreaming of this for years, since the time I first met Mercer Deuce. Usually, you had to be at least 16 years old to be a member. Several other children got whiff of this new privilege I was being accorded and asked to be Sufis too. Baba said, "Sure," which of course took some of the glory out of it for me. Murshida did initiate us, though I know she must suddenly have felt she was running a kids' club. But some of the most dedicated Sufis I know were the children initiated at that time. Baba came back to the U.S. 2 years later, in 1958, after his second accident, and my family joined the crowds in Myrtle Beach to see him. Since his accident, Baba was often carried in a sedan chair at this time. Though he was still vivacious, you could see that his energy wasn't what it used to be only 2 years earlier. But he still enjoyed most attempts to lighten his moments. Perhaps by this time, I was a little too sure of my place in Baba's affections. I was delighted, though, to be invited to lunch that first day in Baba's red brick house inside the stockade. During the meal, I was served 7-Up. Baba seemed troubled. He asked my father if I was old enough to drink cold 7-Up. I was 15, and I didn't like to hear this at all. My father said it was completely fine, and I said loudly that I drank it all the time. But Baba didn't seem convinced. He said he was afraid I might catch a cold. He told me just to sip it. Even after it was served, he kept reaching out to feel if the glass was warm enough yet. I couldn't stand it. I waited until I thought Baba wasn't looking and quickly drank the whole thing. The next morning, I couldn't speak. I had a horrible cold and sore throat. Baba made it clear he didn't want anyone with a contagious cold around him. So I had to stay in my bed in the lantern cabin while days of the darshan went by. By the time I finally recovered, Baba had found a new favorite, Charles Haynes. As soon as I was well, I left early one morning for the sandy forest track by King's Road. My plan was to wait for Baba's car to pass on its way to the daily meeting in the barn. This way, maybe I could steal a hug. When I got there, I found someone had the same idea. It was my young Aunt Eleanor. When Baba's car passed, we didn't get a hug, but we did get a wave. From then on, every morning would find us walking up and down the forest road, waiting for Baba's car. Sometimes we got a wave, but not always. Then, one morning it rained. First a little, then it poured. Ellie and I were drenched, but we walked up and down loudly singing to cheer ourselves up, slogging our way through the puddly ground. We were in the middle of singing, A capital ship for an ocean trip was the walloping window blind, when we suddenly heard a car close behind us. We turned, and there was Baba looking furious. "What do you think you're doing? Get in!" Okay. We jumped inside. I got to sit next to Baba, and he kissed me and was nice to me all the way to the barn, then gestured, "Get out!" Ellie and I came into a room already packed and had to find a place in the back, far from Baba's chair, where we could drip quietly together. It was no more Mr. Nice Guy. In spite of a few stolen moments like the car ride, my luck really had died. I was no longer Baba's darling child. He went everywhere with Charles Haynes. This beautiful little white blonde boy had a naturally reverent nature. At that time, I don't think he understood who Baba was, but he adored him. His most cherished possession was a snow-white Bible that his minister had given him. Hoping his luck would rub off on me, I stuck around Charles as much as I could. I got to know Charles better, but got no place with Baba. I was faced with the challenge of getting over hurt feelings, something that definitely seems to be a theme on the spiritual path. Although I never got really good at this, Baba made it clear that feeling sorry for yourself got nowhere with him. Still, Ellie and I were not out of ideas yet. The men noticed that many of them were wearing those Izod shirts with little alligator embroidered on them. They had the brilliant idea of starting a men's club called the Alligator Club, which put on a show with skits and jokes for Baba, which he seemed to really enjoy. They made him president by presenting him with a crown, a baseball hat covered in alligator skin with a baby stuffed alligator hood looking out the visor. Baba put it on and he looked very striking. The variety show was a big success. Well, Ellie and I reasoned, why shouldn't the woman have something like that? We hatched the Secret Society of Stinkers, an association based only on the idea of getting in to see Baba any way, legal or illegal, that we could. We set out to recruit members. It was hard getting a response. Probably we looked too radical, not to say terroristic. But we did get a few volunteers. I think Phyllis Frederick and Beryl Williams were two. We moved ahead with our plans, lining up for hugs 3 times, slipping in amongst other groups coming into the interview cabin to see Baba, trying to slip past Baba's doorkeepers when their minds were elsewhere. But I think we quickly got a bad reputation. Everyone got wise to us. We were blocked at every turn and soon had no more luck. In desperation, we tried one last ploy. Ellie got some shirt cardboard from Kitty, and we made a pile of membership cards for the Stinker Club. Each card had a picture of a cute little skunk with a flower name to be given to the Mondley. Baba's card had the biggest skunk and read, "The Biggest Stinker." Feeling pretty sure we'd be turned down, I went off to the interview cabin and asked Adi, the doorkeeper, if we might have a chance to show Baba the cards and explain about the club. Adi told me we could go right in. He said Baba had said we were to be admitted anytime we asked. Now, Ellie and I were inside, facing Baba. Ellie began to read to Baba about the club, but she was trembling. She had an adult's loving awe of Baba, and she just couldn't bring herself to tell him he was the biggest stinker. Being still young and brash, I didn't see the problem. I took the cards firmly away from her and told him he was the president of the Stinker Club. Baba began to laugh, and he laughed so hard you could hear it in his nose. I gave Baba his card, and I gave the Mondley their cards. I remember the H was Magnolia. Then, in a moment, it was over. Baba clapped to say, "Get out," and we joyfully ran out. The day Baba left Myrtle Beach, there was some mix-up, and Ellie and I arrived late at the airport. Baba was already deeply surrounded by his lovers, but he spotted me and said, "Threeby, come over here." A footnote to this is that Ellie and I were especially clear on one thing. Since my mother wasn't able to understand or love Baba, we felt, she must be bad. Baba said, "Threeby, put your hand on my hand." I did. Then he said, "Ellie, put your hand on Threeby's hand." She did. And then Baba said, "B, that's my mother, put your hand on Ellie's hand." She did. And Baba brought down his other hand on the pile of hands. "Now," he said, "we are all friends." Then Baba flew away. 4 years later, we went to India for the East-West gathering. What was most striking was that Baba suddenly looked very old and ill. His vivaciousness had vanished. Slowly, I had to face that what I had thought was my love for him was not. I had been attracted by his beauty, lively personality, and charisma, and these things were now invisible. Love, then, wasn't based on the thrilling ways Baba could make you feel, but on how much it meant to you how he himself was doing. If you could love him even at a moment when his physical attractiveness was hidden and he seemed indifferent to you, then that started to be love. Baba at this time often had a majestic look to him, especially when he sat on the dais at the head of the pandal. Thousands and thousands of people filed by for his darshan, and birds flew up and down the long silk tent in the hot afternoons, and then flew around and around his head. He kept up a motion of pulling our love to him and giving it out again. For hours. He looked like God the Father in his kingliness, and he also looked very, very far off. We would watch him for hours as all those people went past. Oddly, for me, it was hard to feel anything. But after leaving the darshan late in the afternoon, the intense, loving feeling of God seemed everywhere, even pouring out of the cement cracks of the broken walkway at the Turf Club Hotel. The main thing that stays with me from this trip is seeing that love is something besides feeling. It is caring how the beloved is doing, not whether he's making you feel good or not. At the East-West gathering, Baba was always telling me to go be with Mehera. I had loved meeting her and hearing her deep, sweet voice after years of just writing her. But it was hard to have Baba always sending me away. Mehera surprised me with a gift of a wedding sari. It was pink nylon with seed pearls sewn on. "You will get married, won't you, Threeby?" So I did, and I had 2 children. Once, when I was with Baba and Mehera was brushing his hair, I saw how thrilled she was to be with him, even though she was with him so much of the time. And once he called me to be with him and suddenly asked, "What will you do with your life, Threeby?" I was still in my teens and hadn't given it much thought, but out popped, "Paint scenes of the lives of all the avatars." Baba didn't respond to this, but years later, when I was launched in making my living as a painter, a chance came up to do a large painting of Baba as Muhammad riding a camel. Then Tony Davis did one of Zoroaster. A sort of artistic conversation took place between us, and we did a number of the rest of the avatars, finishing with Tony's Baba as Krishna, the flute player. Now there's been a new wave of painting Meher Baba everywhere, and I bet there will be more. There are some questions that are always there for anyone wanting to paint Baba. You paint him maybe because you think if you do, there will be a moment when you actually see him, or at least feel a greater closeness. When I began painting Baba, my hope was to do him from memory, though whatever I came up with, I would have to check against many photos for accuracy. Later, I would make little statues of Baba's face and body so I could see how the light fell on them from different positions. This was a big help in seeing Baba a new way. One thing that was true of Baba, and that I would be sorry to have disappear from the world's memory, is his movement. Baba moved quickly, gracefully, and decisively. You don't often see this in paintings of him, but it was a wonderful and characteristic thing. And I think it should be remembered. Baba was always in motion, and if an artist can catch this, I think it's worth catching. Something that seems to me deeply important is to have my heart remember when I'm painting that I'm not just painting to make a lovely image, but to get in touch with Baba, who actually took on the body of a real live man, and to be aware of what that means, divinity inhabiting a body, while I'm painting it. For me, painting Baba well is not painting an idea of God, but jogging myself to memory that he really was here, really cared enough to join us in the flesh. That body is one that will really shake up the future of the world. I tried to keep awake to the fact that Baba was not just a sweetly smiling, neutral, churchy face. His was a powerfully beautiful face that changed every moment, in many ways more human than any other face. He could look delighted, funny, and tender. He could look majestic or witty. His face could look like he was searching your heart for what was hurting you, and he would do anything to fix it. Every movement of his body and face was putting something new in the world and had a freshness nothing else could possibly have. An image of Baba should wake him to sudden life in our hearts and carry a little sting, like the sting of a not quite dry sheet on a clothesline snapping suddenly against your face on a beautiful, clear, windy day. For myself, I have found it's too easy to get used to the idea that the Christ has been here so recently and simply fall asleep. Painting him in a fresh way can be a way to suddenly find yourself facing him, and to make that aliveness available for others also. That is an ideal, but one that seems worth reaching for. I have to believe that Baba loves any attempt by anybody to try to depict him, whether they feel skillful or are sure they are klutz at art. To make a picture of Baba is one way of trying to meet him. Baba said God is far more eager to meet with us than we are with him. It sounds like a promise that he'll come more than halfway. I love painting, so of course that's where I see Baba. Others might see him better in poetry or dance or cooking or almost anything. And anyone really looking at it can see their vision is equally valid. But maybe the ultimate challenge and truest way to see Baba is just by living your life and actually seeing him and honoring him in others, any others. It seems to be an acquired skill, but it is one anyone can try their hand at. It takes no special tools, and if you ask me, there's no chance you'll get bored by getting too good at it. When I think I see people who have this skill, it is so beautiful, it makes me want to drop my brush. This leaves painting in the dust, and it is an ability that has the funny quality of being open to everyone equally. For to please Baba, I guess you don't have to succeed, just to really try. Baba said, "Those who dare to see and love God in everyone and everything experience Him as the everlasting, immediate, divine presence." Anyway, it's something to work on. Thank you. Should I take this off?
Would you like to take any questions from anybody?
Sure.
Or?
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, we gotta get you back up here.
Okay.
Put the contraption on.
Okay.
You can go in and adjust it however you want.
Okay, I hope. Like so?
There you
Okay.
go. Yeah. There we go.
Any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
In addition to what you shared with us just now, can you share one of your favorite moments with Baba that you've carried with you, all these years later?
Yes. Well, one that I think of very often was one moment in Myrtle Beach when Ellie and I, who were trying any way we could think of to get close to Baba, arrived hours early in the morning to wait outside the lagoon cabin where Baba gave interviews. We wanted to be first in line, in this kind of little sandy area that was in front of the lagoon cabin. So we were there for a while and awaited. We were there hours early. And after some time, other people began to come, and it wasn't a line. It was like people were just waiting here and there. And then the time began to grow long. And more people joined, and people were just sort of milling around, So I sat on the ground, and I began drawing, either with my finger or with a stick. I just began drawing in the ground. I think I was showing off, probably, but I was also bored, and I was just drawing in the sand. And all of a sudden, one moment, I felt a kick, a little kick. And so I just went on doing what I was doing. And then the kick came back again. It was firmer, and I went. And then I looked up, and it was Ellie who had kicked me because Baba was standing there, and he was looking at me doing that. And he had been looking for a long time. And he suddenly turned and went off. That's one thing. He, not as though disgusted, but as though he had been there all the time. Baba, there were things that Baba used to do, and he did them to other people also, I think. But one thing I remember is he used to take his fist and push them against the side of my head, or sometimes people he would, if they were driving, he would hold the back of their shoulders, He was a very firm hugger. And he could make you feel that he was just delighted to see you. You felt, when you saw Baba, you felt, there he is. You felt like you didn't, now I'm talking about me, because I know there are people who are gifted that the moment they saw Baba, they saw the Christ. What I saw was the one I had been waiting the whole time to see. Not just an hour or two, but that's why I came. That's why I got myself born, was for that reason, And he was irresistible. You couldn't see him without wanting to run after him, and you couldn't see him without wanting to become really bothersome, according to me, because, you just, you knew that he was the one who, as he looked at you, he knew everything that you usually wish to hide, and that didn't matter. You know, that you even could feel that he was crazy about you, in spite of the worst that you know, it was like your eyes were quickly trying to push things in the way, but he just looked right through all that, and yet loved you like you wouldn't find love like that. You know, so that's what it was like. And yes?
In 62, when he was so ill, were there still flashes of humor going on?
There were, but it was a shock to see. Baba would do that. He would laugh at things, and people tried to make him laugh, but it seemed like with an effort, you know. It was a big surprise, and I remember this one thing. You want to hear a horrible Baba story? Okay. When I went to the East-West gathering, I was lucky, and I was asked to come early, a little early, and that was the first time I heard Meher's voice. It was on the telephone, and you know how deep and sort of Greta Garbo-like almost her voice was. It was a very thrilling, deep voice. Completely, I'd been writing for her for years, and I had no idea of her. But all of a sudden, you know how the voice can suddenly make you aware of who you're talking to, you know? So she invited me to come to Guru Prasad early, and I know, really, that everyone goes through big, major things in life. Everybody does. I mean, everybody here, if they haven't already, they're going to lose their mom and dad. They're going to lose their closest friend. You know, stuff like that happens to just everybody. But it seemed to me that since I first saw Baba, things had gotten speeded up. And some of that was hard, you know. And I sort of began to get the picture, hey, you know, you love Baba, and the trees start to fall down right and left. You know, you better look out. So I was just a teenager, but I guess I was about 17 or 18. But anyhow, I came up the steps, and I looked down Guru Prasad Hall, and there was Baba. And my first memory was that he was in the middle, and chair right in the middle at the end. You know, it was like a palace, but it was like a little palace. You know, and on one side were his men Mandli, and on the other side were his woman Mandli. And I hadn't been expecting to see Baba right away, so I had my suitcases in my hand, and I just dropped them, and I thought, give me time. I mean, I didn't say it right out like that, but I thought I was playing for time, because I didn't know. I realized that God is the most major threat to your ego that you can possibly come. It's fatal, you know, and I was getting that message. So I began to walk down the hall to see Baba. And I also thought, you know, I always adored you, but I never knew exactly if you were God or not. I'm going to take a look and see, and this time I will really see. So I walked all the way to where Baba was at the end, and he looked incredibly older, and I think paler. And he just looked up at me, and he said, "You should have run to me." So, and if you ask me if at that moment I saw him as God, no, I didn't have that privilege, you know. I mean, I know that's who he is, but I think I really came to that knowledge more after his death. At the time he was alive, he was just who I loved like crazy and always wanted to be with, and who there was something that was coming out of him that was just happiness, you know, and you wanted to be in that happiness, that's all. You know, you wanted to be as close to it as you could get. You know, I'm not one of those people who not real spiritual. But but I think anyone who saw Baba couldn't, even if you took him only in a worldly way, you would adore him. And every move he made was different than any move anyone else ever made. You know, that's what he was like. Are there any more questions? Yeah.
What kind of communication did you have with him through your family? Did you get messages from Baba through the years?
Yes. In fact, Baba wanted very much that I would always write Mehera. And I have to tell you that I had trouble with this because you know how, you know what Mani is like. Mani is extremely bubbly and witty and interested in everything and completely easy to love. And I loved Mani, and I began writing her spontaneously. And Baba said, I want you to write Mehera. So I began writing both of them. But my letters to Mani gradually got longer and longer, and mine to Mehera got shorter. Because if you wrote Mehera, she really was a different idea in a way, to my mind, than Mani. And that is, her focus was so entirely on Baba that that's what she saw. She didn't see anything else. Nothing else really interested her, even though she would write letters that were very beautiful. You know, you could feel that her interest was solely on Baba, and that her job was not really as a communicator with the outside world, sort of like Mani is, you know. So Baba eventually, if I forgot to write Mehera, he would send a telegram asking why I hadn't written Mehera. And finally he asked me not to write Mani anymore, but only write Mehera. And that was a big shock. Any more questions? Oh, good, yeah. Okay.
Well, when Baba was still in the body, had you become an artist by that time? Was he ever giving you any direction in that sense?
I think I had always had that inclination because in my family there's a strong kind of artistic bent that's been there for some generations. You know, so I was always working on that and hoping to be that, you know. And I remember once I used to send drawings to Meher, and I remember once I sent this picture of Baba outside the jail in Pune, where Baba's going like this, and you see him mostly, you're looking down sort of at the top of his head. It's a very beautiful picture. Anyhow, I did a drawing of this, and I sent it to Meher, and she really liked that drawing, and she said all these nice things about it, so it was a shock when I came to India to realize that she had retouched this picture, and she said, Baba's nose isn't really that long, you know. So she'd changed it. She'd drawn over it. So the truth is best. So you were, yes?
Could you tell us something about your time at MeherWoods with Baba?
Oh, yes. That was the time, you know, it's interesting because in many people's minds, those times with Baba in MeherWoods are like a glowing moment that kind of meant a lot to a lot of people. To me, it was sort of part of Baba. When Baba came, people were always thinking up events for him to go to, you know. But that was one afternoon, and I remember that afternoon, and actually I remember that afternoon very well because that was one of the few times I really had to struggle to get close to Baba. But we all sat there on a big stump, and Baba was there, a stump of a redwood tree in that beautiful forest with kind of, seemed like that kind of gold afternoon light pouring down. And I remember all these big redwood trees around. Some of them were hollowed out, I don't know, maybe by lightning or something like that. But it was a very pleasant moment. But it was more momentary than you would think, you know. It was like in the blink of an eye or something. And I remember also going to that Lilliput theater that you mentioned. Yeah, wasn't it the Lilliput theater? It was such an interesting theater because the stage area was only about this tall. It was a puppet theater, and the puppets were little figures about this high that were fished out on long sticks, and they did a performance of, Midsummer Night's Dream. That's right. That's right. Shakespeare, all these little puppets. Any other questions?
Well, how was it? Was it a good puppet show?
Excuse me?
Was it a good puppet show?
Well, that wasn't what my mind was really on, The part I remember as being pretty is that when it turned from the regular world into the fairy world, they had painted the sets in these glow-in-the-dark colors, and how magical it was to see all the little fairies coming on in glowing, It's very pretty.
When Baba dropped his body, what
Yeah.
was it making in life?
When
Baba dropped his body, so suddenly.
that was something, because I remember when the news came, and I guess it takes everyone a different way, and I remember my mother called me and she said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "No." And she said, "You better sit down." So she told me about Baba dropping his body, and I just kept saying, "No." It was totally impossible to believe. It was impossible to believe. Because even though Baba was at such a distance, he was everything in our life, and it was just impossible to believe that he would go. And so I just kept saying no. And some people think denial is a river in Egypt. So then I remember there was a faculty party that my husband was going to that night, and I thought, well, Baba would want me to go to that. So I went to it, and then it hit me, and I didn't, turned into a slobbering mess during that party. But mostly I would say that it was too big a thing to digest all at once. The full import of it kind of only leaked, it was at its worst years later. It was like the message sort of came in slowly. Even though we went to the last darshan, and let me tell you, that was like, I can't explain to you, but it's probably the most joy that I expect to have for several lifetimes, because for some reason, there was nothing leading up to it. We went to last darshan, I think we were all expecting to sort of sob our way through it or something, but when we got there, the joy was so intense, and it was sort of joy mixed with love, and it was like a monsoon of it, It was like there was no pore in your body that could escape it. And it was so, you lived in that. If you were there for 1 second, or if you were there for 3 weeks, it would have been the same thing. You were just stuffed with it. And after a while, you almost wanted to get out of it because it was so much, And in a way, it's not exactly possible to recall, but there's nothing I can say about it. It was just... and Mani warned us. She said, now, while you're here, it's like those plants. She said in India, a plant, like a fruit tree or something, you build a little dike all around it so that when it's watered, you keep the water in there. And at first you pour the water in and it's all splashing and sparkling, and it looks so abundant and good. And after a while, it all sinks under the ground. She said, it's helping the roots. And She said, you have to remember that, you know. And I really did have to remember that, because that experience of extreme joy was true at the last darshan, and I guess about the time that we were going back, and then it sort of sank out of sight. And then gradually the awareness that Baba was not there in physical form and was not going to physically contact us again really sunk in, you know. And that was hard, and something that had to be come to terms with. Yeah.
How would you say your relationship with Baba changed then after he was no longer in the physical form and you could contact him or expect to see him?
Well, you know, this is an interesting question, because it's an interesting question because it's sort of like, I heard once that St. Teresa said, I believe in the sun even when it is not shining, and I believe in God even when I feel him not, you know? And I feel that that is kind of the real stuff. You know, I think the real stuff, when you have got, it's not the same as just saying it's there. It's something you kind of have to live your way into, I think. And that is that you gradually become aware that whether you have blissful times, and I have had those. I've had those for years. Or when they sink out of sight, there's something that has to be constant through all that stuff. Whether you're going through misery or whether you're rolling in joy, there has to be a constant thing. And that constant thing is Baba. It's independent of joy or sorrow, you know. And it's something that, in a way, you don't, it's not just handed to you. You have to live your way into it, you know. And I always think of Baba, when I think of Baba now, everyone has their own way of thinking of him, and I think of him as ongoingness, in spite of anything. That quality that can endure all kinds of changes and remain level, you know. That's what I think of as, that's the way I think of as Baba. It isn't tickled by highs or lows. That's my Baba, you know. Everyone has their own way of thinking of it. That's the way I think of it. Any other questions? Guess not. Thank you. Thanks a lot.